Hello everyone. The next topic which we will be studying is about the cardiac cycle. So if I go about with the definition of cardiac cycle, then it refers to the sequence of events. It refers to the sequence of events that takes place when the heart beats. So that takes place when a heart beats. So this is the definition of the cardiac cycle. Now what is cardiac cycle? So cardiac cycle attributes to a comprehensive heartbeat from its production to the commencement of the next beat. So it comprises of diastole, the systole and the intervening pauses. Now the occurrence of cardiac cycle is illustrated by a heartbeat which is naturally indicated as beat per minute. So if I talk about a healthy human heart, it beats about 72 times per minute. So it beats about beats per 72 times beats per minute. So it is about the human heart, healthy human heart, which states that there are 72 cardiac cycles per minute. So it states that there are 72 cardiac cycles per minute. Now, the cardiac cycle involves a complete contraction and relaxation of both the atria and the ventricles, and the cycle lasts for approximately about 0.8 seconds. Let's start with the first line here. That cardiac cycle helps in the circulation of the blood. So it is the time period which is comprising of all the events from one heart contraction to the start of the next heart contraction. Now each of these cycles starts with a depolarization of the SA node, which is being followed by the arterial systole, then ventricular systole, followed by diastole of the complete heart. So these are the events of the cardiac cycle. Now it includes the systole, that is the contraction of the cardiac muscle, diastole, which is the relaxation of the cardiac muscle. So 72 per minute is stated as 72 cardiac cycles per minute. So this is the cardiac cycle. Now what is the duration of this cycle? So calculation of the duration of one complete cardiac cycle is 60 per hour. If for instance, if the HR of a person is 72 bpm, then the duration of the cardiac cycle will be given by 60 upon 75, that will be equal to 0.83 s, which is the duration which is inversely proportional to the HR. So this is the about the cardiac. So next, this is the sequence of events which takes place in a cardiac cycle. So this is a diagrammatic representation which shows the arterial systole, ventricle systole, ventricular diastole. So these are some of the events. So what is happening is, in arterial systole there is a arrow which is representing here, that is the left ventricle is filling up and the right ventricle is filling up. So it is a three-way valve. Three-way valve opens up in this case. So there is a reduction of arteria. So then the ventricular systole, where the contraction of the ventricles takes place, and diastole, which is the relaxation of the heart chambers, where the filling the right atrium of the blood. So this is how a cardiac cycle works. Now, next is about the fundamentals of the cardiac cycle. So what are the fundamentals? Heart is mainly involved in pumping blood through the body through the pulmonary and systematic circulations. So the contraction of the heart, they create fluctuations in the pressure, allowing the movement of the blood. The flow of the blood from a region of a high pressure to a region of a low pressure. So there the flow will be from the region of a high pressure to the region of a low pressure. So events. So heart has two ventricles and two artericles. So the events in the left and the right ventricle are same. However, with lower pressure gradients in the right side. Now, even though the relaxation occurs at the same time, at the diastole of complete heart, they last for about 0.4 seconds. The arterial and the ventricular systole, they does not occur at the same time. So, these are the fundamentals of the cardiac cycle. Now, what is the mechanism of cardiac cycle here? So, there is a contraction of both the arteria which precedes that of the ventricles. Now, this contraction sequence enables the separation of the right and the left heart, which is functionally at least at two distinct circuits. Now, the cardiac events can be split into the diastole and the systole. So, we will be discussing both these pressures in detail in the next slide. So, if I talk about the diastole, then it indicates the ventricular filling, while the systole indicates the ventricular ejection or the contraction. Though they have varying pressures, the systole and diastole, they occurs both the right and the left heart. So there is a varying pressure between the systole and the diastole, and they both occurs at the right and the left heart. So diastole starts with the closing of the aortic valve and terminates with the closing of the tricuspid or mitral valve. Whereas this period, which includes the ventricle filling, which was being depicted in the diagram in the previous slide, and relaxation, the diastole indicates when blood reverts blood to the heart and prepare for the ventricular contraction. And if I talk about the systole, then it starts when the tricuspid or the mitral valve closes and ends with the closing of the aortic valve. So this phase of the cardiac cycle indicates ventricular there is a ventricular contraction which forces the blood into the arteries. And during the contraction of the ventricles, the pressure in the ventricle start becoming greater as compared to the adjacent blood vessel walls that allow the blood to flow out. So this was about the mechanism of the cardiac cycle. So next I will be discussing about the phases of the cardiac cycle. Now there are different phases of the cardiac cycle which occurs. So what are these? So there is an arterial diastole, in which in this stage the chambers of the heart they are calmed. So the chambers of the heart are calmed here, and that is when there is an aortic wall and the pulmonary artery which closes, and there is a atrioventricular walls which opens and closing the chambers of the heart to relax. So this is about the arterial diastole. Next is about the systole, that is the arterial systole. So at this phase, the blood cells flow from arterium to the ventricles, and at this period arterium contracts. So systole, arterial systole. So here there is the arterial, which means here the blood will flow from atrium to the ventricle. So it will flow from the arterial to the ventricle. Next is isovolumic contraction. So at this stage, the ventricles begins to contract, and the arterioventricular walls and pulmonary artery walls close, but there won't be any transformation in the volume. So there won't be any transformation in the volume. Next is the vascular ejection. So here ventricles contract and emptying. So pulmonary artery and aortic walls close here. So pulmonary artery and aortic walls close here. Next is isovolumic relaxation. So here in this phase, there is no blood which enters the ventricles, and consequently pressure decreases. So here the pressure will decrease in this case, and the ventricles stop contracting and they begins to relax. So here the ventricles begins to relax. And now due to the pressure in the aorta, pulmonary artery and aortic valves closes. So in this, now next is ventricular filling stage. So in this stage, blood flows from arteria to the ventricles. So blood flows from arteria to the into the ventricles, and it is altogether known as one stage. After that, there are three phases that involve the flow of blood to the pulmonary artery from the ventricles. So these are the phases of the cardiac cycle. So next I will be discussing is about the systolic pressure and the diastolic pressure. Now systolic pressure, it is dynamic and it is not constant when pressure is exerted by the blood flow through the arteries. So when there is an active heartbeat that is called a systole, it ejects blood into the arteries. So such a dynamic ejection of the blood into the arteries, it will result in the increase in the pressure in the arteries. So here the pressure in the arteries will increase in the pressure in the arteries. So this peak blood pressure which is reached at the time of active cardiac contraction, it is referred to as the systolic pressure. And if I talk about a systolic blood pressure in an individual, it is around 120 mmHg or below. So this is the systolic pressure. Now if I talk about the diastolic pressure, then this is the pressure which is exerted by the blood in the arteries between the heartbeat. So when the heart is not ejecting blood into the arteries actively, so this pressure is defined as this, that it is being the pressure which is exerted by the blood in the arteries between the heartbeats, and here the heart is not ejecting blood into the arteries actively. So once the heart contracts, the cardiac ventricles monetarily relax for it and gets refilled with blood, preparing for the next contraction. For the next contraction, the blood will be refilled, and this phase of ventricular relaxation, so there is a ventricular relaxation which is taking place, so that is known as the diastolic pressure. The blood pressure at this time is referred to as the diastolic blood pressure, and the diastolic blood pressure when sitting is nearly around 80 mmHg or below. So this blood pressure often increases even at quiet rest or when there is a hypertension. So this blood pressure will increase in these cases. So this was all about the cardiac cycle, and these are some of the references. Thank you.